The SAVE Act has 50 votes on the record. 71% of the country support it. And the President of the United States just shut down Congress to force it through. It still can't pass. And folks, I want to talk about this and explain it properly, because this is no longer a story about one bill. It's a story about who actually runs Washington. And right now, the honest answer is nobody. Now, I want to start with what's real. On June 5th, 11:39 at night, vote number 151. That was Susan Collins. She flipped. Okay, the Clean Save Act hit 50 votes. And with J.D. Vance holding the tiebreaker, that's a majority of the U.S. Senate on the record. But 50 is not 60. And the Senate, well, it already run this play once. Back in March, Republicans actually put the bill on the floor. They voted 51-48 just to take it up, with Lisa Murkowski as the only Republican that objected. 3 days of debate, a photo ID amendment, and that drew 53 votes, every single Republican voting yes. But it still died at 60. 60, it still died. Mike Lee put it plainly that there were 10 votes shy of the cloture. And by May, leadership quietly shelved the whole thing. And that's when the real fight started, because it stopped being Republicans versus Democrats and it became Trump versus Senate Leader Thune. Now, I just have to be fair to Thune here, because he hasn't necessarily been hiding. He's been saying the same thing on the record since February. The votes aren't there to nuke the filibuster. And the votes are not there for talking filibuster either. His reasoning is a floor mechanics problem. And having run across all of this before, I can tell you it's pretty real, okay? A talking filibuster is not just unlimited debate, it's unlimited amendments as well. And the Democrats could force vote after vote, designed to split this conference, and Thune doesn't believe his own members would hold together, tabling hundreds of them for weeks. Now, his staff went looking for a single bill that passed by grinding out a filibuster that way, and they couldn't find one. So you can either agree or disagree, but that's his math. And the votes for the bill and the votes for the procedure are two different lists. And the president looked at that math and made a different calculation. If the Senate won't change the rules, he'll raise the price until it does. And count the escalation with me, because when you line it up, it's staggering. I mean, number one, he demanded Republicans kill the filibuster outright. Repeatedly, he's asked for that publicly. 2, he vowed not to reopen the Department of Homeland Security until the bill's passed. And 3, he announced a legislative blockade that no bill would get his signature until the SAVE Act reaches his desk. And then 4, he demanded it gets stuffed into the reconciliation package, even though the Senate parliamentarian had already ruled it ineligible. And 5, which is the big one, is FISA, Section 702, the government's warrantless surveillance, and expired on June 12th. And the first lapse since the program began in 2008. And the president's response was to declare he's against renewing FISA at all, unless the full SAVE Act is firmly attached to it. You know what that means? It means that our most sensitive intel collection tool is now a hostage in a fight over election law. And that's where we are. And it's exactly why you and I need to be following this closely. See, I look at it like this. I'm covering every move in this standoff as it happens, the vote, the leverage plays, the pressure campaigns. There's a lot of faceless junk out here, and there's a lot of AI and people just recycling bullshit because they have no idea. But if you want the version that is real, subscribe, because that's what I'll give you. Now, the standoff, is still live. Okay, and both sides have been making their moves. Thune's answer came fast. The Senate will move FISA on its own without the SAVE Act attached, and as soon as he has the votes, a direct rebuff of President Trump. The House delivered its own answer, a procedural measure to tie the SAVE Act with the defense bill, but that went down in flames. Speaker Johnson, he's floating reconciliation, but You have to remember, escalation number 4, the parliamentarian already closed that door once. So every path has become blocked. The filibuster path, the rules change path, the hostage path, reconciliation path, all of them. Which brings us to the quote that should have gotten 10 times the coverage it did. Tom Tillis, Republican senator, one of the original 4 holdouts. He just declared the SAVE Act dead. Not because the votes will never exist, but because he thinks the clock has ran out. And this is where I can explain better than many of these people here on YouTube, because I understand this stuff. I've been part of the system. Okay. New election rules, well, they're not a light switch. Okay. States would need to retrain every county election office, rebuild the registration systems, print new materials, and litigate the inevitable lawsuits. So even if the SAVE Act passed tomorrow morning, implementing it nationwide before this November, he believes is a fantasy. And Tillis isn't making an argument about votes, really. He's talking about the calendar. So when he says he's dead, maybe it is. But I don't know. That argument turns the seat math into the whole new ballgame. Okay. One of the 4 Republicans who built the original wall, McConnell and Tillis, are both walking off the field. There's 2 open seats on this. Collins already crossed over on the clean bill. Okay. Majewski isn't up this cycle. So you fill those open seats with Republicans who back the bill and back changing the procedure, and those 50 votes from June 5th stop being a symbol and start being a countdown, which is why the SAVE Act fight isn't happening on the Senate floor anymore. It's happening in the primaries. Okay. And I've stood in front of voters in Ohio twice. And I can tell you the question every candidate in America is about to face at every stop is, do you support the SAVE Act? And everybody says yes to that. Question is, how will they change the rules to pass it? That's the litmus test now. That's how candidates answer. And how candidates answer will decide whether this bill becomes law in 2027, if it continues, or if it dies for another decade. Again, the president wants this. It's right for America. If we listen to what he said last night in his speech, 220 million voter registration packages with names, numbers, party affiliation, whether they served in the military, all of that conspired and now in possession of China. The fact remains, though, nobody runs Washington right now. That's not a spin from either side. That's what the record shows. Donald Trump should be running Washington. But based on this inter-party infighting, power moves, brokerage of leverage, no one really is in charge. But the next move on this belongs to Thune. To watch whether FISA moves as a standalone, because if it does, the president's biggest hostage walks out the door. And this fight will then move to the primaries for good. So what do you think? Do you think Trump's right to hold FISA hostage over the SAVE Act? I think he is. I think he's 100% right. I think voter ID in a secure election this upcoming midterms is absolutely paramount how this country moves forward. Absolutely. And while it may seem daunting to put forward all of the changes that are going to be required by the SAVE Act, the easiest one, perhaps the most dominant one, is requiring voter ID. That's a pretty easy change.
Is that JR? Yes. But we love you, JR. Thank you very much. Thank you, man. This guy, he's a genius. Thank you, JR. Really nice.